She was just 18 years old when the steel door shut behind her. What waited on the other side wasn't simply prison. It was a place so brutal that men on death row have said they would choose execution over spending a single year there. The U.S. Department of Justice has described it as one of the most abusive correctional facilities in the country. A prison where guards are accused of exploiting inmates, where reporting abuse often results in retaliation, and where women disappear into isolation cells for daring to speak out. This is Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida, and Misty Crosland has been trapped inside its walls for nearly 15 years, serving a 25-year sentence for selling approximately $3,000 worth of prescription pills. But that's not why people still say her name. Misty Croslin was the last known person to see 5-year-old Haleigh Cummings alive. Haleigh vanished from her bed in the middle of the night and was never seen again. No body. No crime scene. No answers. Only questions that refused to fade with time. Misty's account of that night changed, again and again. Timelines didn't align. Details shifted. Investigators became convinced she knew more than she was saying. But belief isn't proof, and without physical evidence, they could never charge her in the child's disappearance. So prosecutors found another path. What Misty faces inside Lowell isn't merely incarceration, it's prolonged psychological destruction. Experts describe it as a form of slow erosion. Constant fear, deprivation, isolation, and humiliation that chips away at identity itself. It's a punishment that compounds daily, with no finish line, no release, no final moment the suffering ends. Death row inmates at least know when it will be over. This never is. By the end of this video, you'll understand why long-term confinement in facilities like Lowell is increasingly viewed by psychologists and human rights advocates as more cruel than execution. You'll hear from forensic psychologists, former detectives, and prison insiders who describe what truly happens behind those walls. And you'll see why Misty Crosland's sentence forces an uncomfortable conversation about justice, vengeance, and the limits of the American prison system. Because for Misty, the nightmare didn't begin years into her sentence. It began within hours of her arrival. Before we continue, let us pray. We pray for Haleigh Cummings, wherever she may be. May God give her strength to come back home. Amen. Type Amen in the comment section. Tell me where you are watching from. I'm an investigative journalist, and I spend countless hours digging deep, chasing leads, and finding details that most people will never see. The kind of truth that's hidden, hard to find, and often buried beneath layers of lies. I need your support. Please, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Every click, every subscriber, gives me the drive to keep going, to dig even deeper, and to bring you stories that most others won't touch. If there's a case or story you want me to investigate, please tell me in the comments. I promise, I will do everything I can to uncover the hidden facts for you. Please, don't let these truths stay in the shadows. To understand how she ended up here, we have to go back to the night everything changed. February 9th. 2009. Satsuma, Florida. A quiet rural community. Trailer homes scattered among dark stretches of road. On that cold winter night, Misty Crosland was just 17 years old. She was living with her boyfriend, Lowell Cummings, and his 2 young children inside a small mobile home. Misty had dropped out of school in the 6th grade. She could barely read or write. Her childhood had been shaped by neglect, instability, and trauma few teenagers ever escape. That night, she was babysitting while Ronald worked his overnight shift. She put 5-year-old Haleigh and her younger brother to bed around 8 p.m. Ronald called throughout the evening to check in. By all accounts, nothing seemed wrong. But when Ronald returned home just after 3 a.m., the unthinkable had happened. Haleigh was gone. The back door was ajar, propped open with a cinder block. What followed was chaos. Amber alerts. Helicopters sweeping the night sky. Volunteers searching swamps, woods, and nearby waterways. National media descended on the town as the case exploded across television screens. And at the center of it all stood Misty Crosland, the last person to see the child alive. Detectives questioned her relentlessly. Her statements shifted. Timelines conflicted. Investigators grew increasingly convinced she was withholding critical information. Captain Dominic Piscitello, the lead detective on the case, would later say that from the very beginning, investigators believed Haleigh didn't simply vanish, and that Misty never told them the full truth. But belief alone wasn't enough to bring justice. And that uncertainty would follow Misty Crosland for the rest of her life. Truthfully, Haleigh was never found. 16 years later, her disappearance remains one of only 7 unsolved Amber Alert cases in the state of Florida. Investigators have long said they believe she is dead, but belief is not evidence. Without a body, without forensic proof, no charges were ever filed in connection with her disappearance. The case stalled. The questions didn't. Just 1 month after Haleigh vanished, Misty Croslin and Lowell Cummings were married. Misty was still only 17 years old, which required parental consent. Lowell told reporters he believed Haleigh would have wanted it that way, a statement that drew public outrage and deepened suspicion around both of them. The marriage did not survive the pressure. After just 6 months, Lowell filed for divorce, citing relentless media attention, emotional strain, and the non-stop scrutiny of investigators. But while the marriage ended, law enforcement's focus on Misty Crosland did not. If they couldn't prove she was responsible for Haleigh's disappearance, they would look for another way in. Nearly a year later, in January of 2010, investigators launched a covert narcotics operation, one that would ultimately define the rest of Misty's life. An undercover plan was set in motion. A woman Misty believed to be a trusted friend, Donna Brock, approached her with a proposition. Brock claimed she had legally prescribed oxycodone pills and wanted help selling them. She reassured Misty that it was safe, low risk, and easy money. The supposed buyer, someone complaining of chronic back pain, was, in reality, an undercover narcotics detective. Over the following weeks, multiple transactions took place. Meetings were arranged at truck stops and parking lots. Small quantities of pills were exchanged. Every interaction was secretly recorded. Surveillance teams documented each move. By the end of the operation, the total value of the pills Misty sold amounted to roughly $3,000. On January 20, 2010, the arrests came swiftly. Misty Crosland, Lowell Cummings, Misty's brother, Tommy Crosland, along with 2 additional individuals. All were charged with drug trafficking offenses. But what made this case especially notable wasn't just the charges, it was the timing. Misty had just turned 18 years old. Law enforcement waited. By delaying the arrests until after her birthday, prosecutors ensured she could be charged as an adult, exposing her to dramatically harsher sentencing. The operation was coordinated across 2 counties, St. Johns and Putnam, maximizing both leverage and potential prison time. Misty's court-appointed attorney, Robert Fields, would later describe the case as unwinnable. There were recordings, video surveillance, undercover testimony. The evidence, he said, was overwhelming. Fields advised Misty to plead no contest. He assured her that under Florida's Youthful Offender Act, she would face no more than 6 years in prison, a sentence that would allow for rehabilitation rather than permanent destruction. If you're still here, thank you for staying with me through this investigation. I truly appreciate you taking the time to watch all the way through. If you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps support this work and allows me to bring you more real investigations. And if there's a case or story you'd like me to look into next, share it in the comments. October 2010. St. Johns County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Haleigh's family filled the gallery. Cameras waited outside. The weight of 2 cases, one unsolved, one airtight, hung in the air. Haleigh's mother, Crystal Sheffield, addressed the court. She spoke of unanswered questions, of a child who never came home. She said she believed Misty knew what happened to her daughter, and that the truth had never been told. Haleigh's grandmother, Teresa Nevis, followed. Fighting through tears, she asked where the justice for Haleigh was. She said it was painful to look at Misty, not out of hatred, but because every unanswered question still lived in her face. Then Misty's father, Hank Crosland Sr., stood to speak. He told the judge his daughter was not a drug dealer, that she had never lived a criminal life, that she was a scared, uneducated teenager who made a reckless mistake. He begged the court to show mercy, to give Misty a chance to survive what life had already taken from her. During the hearing, Misty spoke as well. She revealed traumatic details of her childhood: abuse, neglect, illiteracy, instability. A life marked by survival rather than choice. But sympathy was in short supply. And what came next would shock even seasoned legal observers. She testified that between the ages of 7 and 14, she had been the victim of repeated sexual abuse by 2 individuals. She told the court that although Ronald Cummings could be harsh with her, living with him still felt like an improvement over the life she had known before. She said she loved him and believed the relationship gave her a sense of stability she had never had. Her attorney argued that Misty had been manipulated, that the drug case was not pursued in isolation, but as a way to place her in custody and pressure her for information about Haleigh's disappearance. Prosecutors rejected that claim, insisting the drug charges were completely unrelated to the missing child investigation. They argued the case stood on its own evidence. Judge Wendy Berger listened to both sides. Then she made her decision. Misty Cummings broke down in tears as the sentence was read. Her attorney had told her to expect mandatory drug treatment and no more than 6 years in prison. Instead, the judge imposed a 25-year sentence. 2 months later, in January 2011, Misty was sentenced again in Putnam County, this time for 7 additional drug trafficking charges stemming from the same investigation. She received another 25-year sentence, along with millions of dollars in fines and an additional 5 years of probation. The sentences were ordered to run concurrently. That meant she would not serve 50 years, but the 25-year term remained in place. With time served and good behavior, her projected release date is June 10, 2031. For comparison, her ex-husband Ronald Cummings received a 15-year sentence. He was released in October 2022 after serving just over 12 years. Her brother, Tommy, also received 15 years. Others involved in the case received similar sentences. Misty, the youngest and arguably the most vulnerable among them, received the longest punishment. And she was sent to a place that would make that punishment far more severe than the number of years alone. Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida, is not an ordinary prison. It is the largest women's prison in the United States. Opened in 1956, it houses approximately 2,300 women across multiple security levels. Over the years, it has developed a reputation as one of the most dangerous and troubled correctional facilities in the country. In December 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice released a highly critical report following a multi-year investigation. The findings were alarming. Federal investigators concluded that mistreatment of incarcerated women by staff was widespread and deeply ingrained in the facility's culture. Between 2015 and 2019, the investigation reviewed 161 allegations involving inappropriate relationships or conduct between staff and prisoners. 8 cases resulted in arrests. Dozens of other staff members resigned while under investigation or were terminated for misconduct, dishonesty, or policy violations. The report described a range of deeply concerning behavior. Women reported being subjected to unwanted physical contact, coercion, and exploitation by those in positions of authority. In some cases, prisoners felt pressured to comply out of fear or desperation. Equally troubling was how complaints were handled. Women who reported misconduct were frequently placed in restrictive housing while investigations were conducted. During that time, they lost their prison jobs, program access, and daily routines. For many, weeks in isolation became unbearable. Faced with that reality, numerous women eventually withdrew their complaints simply to return to the general population. Speaking up came at a cost. And this was the environment Misty Crosland was sent into, young, traumatized, and carrying one of the most stigmatized names in the state. Former inmates have described Lowell Correctional Institution as a place of extreme hardship. Kim Lawrence, whose daughter was incarcerated there, began maintaining a Facebook page to support families and eventually became an advocate for incarcerated women. Laurette Phillipson, who spent more than 8 years at Lowell, has stated that misconduct by staff continued even after the federal investigation concluded. This is where Misty Croslin was sent. And this is where she remains today, in 2025. In letters shared by supporters, Misty has described her daily existence. She wrote that her life consists almost entirely of working and sleeping, saying it is the only way to make time pass more quickly. She keeps to herself to avoid conflict. She has written that conditions inside the facility continue to worsen, that changes are frequent and rarely positive. She says the food is insufficient. Basic necessities are often unavailable. While incarcerated, she lost her mother. In her words, she feels completely alone. After months of attending classes and attempting to improve herself, she was removed from the GED program. She was told she had too much time remaining on her sentence to qualify. Pause on that for a moment. Denied access to education because her sentence was considered too long. According to Dr. Gary Baccato, a forensic psychologist who has studied long-term incarceration, extended sentences in high-security environments can produce a distinct form of psychological harm. The combination of time, isolation, and constant stress can fundamentally change how a person thinks, feels, and relates to the world. Paul Morrow, a retired NYPD inspector who has consulted on correctional conditions, has explained that in facilities like Lowell, the pressure never lets up. These environments are structured for control rather than rehabilitation. Every interaction carries risk. Stability is rare. Cameron Lindsay, a prison consultant, has noted that women's prisons often receive fewer resources and less oversight than men's facilities. As a result, isolation can be more severe and vulnerability more pronounced. Over time, the effects compound, year after year. Which brings us to the central question. Why do some experts describe Misty Crosland's prison experience as worse than death? It comes down to three factors: time, control, psychological erosion. Misty was 18 years old when she was sentenced. She is now 33. She has spent nearly 15 years behind those walls, with at least 6 more years remaining. By the time she is released, she will be 39 years old. That means 21 years of her life, her entire young adulthood, will have been spent inside one of the most troubled correctional facilities in America. Every day looks the same. The same concrete walls. The same metal fixtures. The same rigid routine. When to wake up. When to eat. When to work. When to shower. Every moment is dictated by someone else. There is no autonomy. No privacy and no control. Chris McDonough, a retired detective with the Cold Case Foundation, has observed that death is final and immediate. Life imprisonment has been described by experts as a gradual stripping away of identity. Day by day, month by month, year by year, the person you once were slowly fades. At Lowell, control extends far beyond locked doors and concrete walls. It is psychological. The Department of Justice report documented how power within the facility was often misused to intimidate, manipulate, and silence incarcerated women. There is the constant awareness that speaking up could bring consequences. That reporting misconduct might result in weeks of isolation. That mistreatment becomes normalized simply because it is expected. For someone like Misty, who experienced abuse as a child, who struggled with literacy, who entered prison already vulnerable, this environment can function as a continuous reopening of old wounds. There is no clear sense of safety. No place to fully let one's guard down. No lasting moment of calm. Keith Rover, a former prison minister who worked extensively in women's facilities, has said the mental weight of these conditions is difficult to grasp from the outside. Survival requires constant alertness. The body may adapt, but the mind never fully rests. Hope erodes. Perhaps most damaging is what happens internally over years of this existence. Separation from loved ones. Disconnection from the outside world. The way time itself begins to feel distorted. Days blur together. Years pass quietly. Life continues elsewhere. Opportunities disappear. Milestones are missed. The realization sets in that the world is moving forward without you. And unlike death, there is no ending point. Only time. Unchanging. Relentless. Psychological time. Throughout Misty Crosland's incarceration, one question has never gone away. What does she know about Haleigh Cummings? Investigators have long believed she holds critical information. Her accounts of that night have shifted over time. Timelines have failed to align. She has never provided a single, consistent version that could be independently verified. In 2011, from prison, Misty gave an interview revisiting the events surrounding Haleigh's disappearance. This version differed from what she had told investigators in 2009. She said she woke up and noticed the kitchen light was on. Believing Ronald had returned home, she went to check. When she realized he wasn't there, she grabbed her phone and called him repeatedly, more than 20 times, with no answer. Only then, she said, did she discover Haleigh was missing. Over the years, other names entered the conversation. Misty's brother, Tommy Croslin, and her cousin, Joe Overstreet, were later accused by various family members of involvement. Tommy claimed Overstreet had come to the home looking for a weapon, and when he could not find it, took Haleigh instead. He alleged they drove toward the St. Johns River and that Overstreet was responsible for what followed. Overstreet has denied these claims and has never been charged. Haleigh's mother, Crystal Sheffield, has remained unwavering in her belief that Misty knows the truth. During Misty's sentencing, Sheffield looked directly at her and asked why, if she claimed to care for the children, this had happened. She said that one day, the answers would come. That truth has a way of resurfacing. And that unanswered question continues to follow Misty Croslin, inside a prison where time does not heal, but accumulates. Before his retirement, Captain Dominic Piscitello stated that he believed the truth was hidden somewhere within Misty's inconsistencies. A child disappeared while in her care, and in his view, Misty never fully accounted for what happened that night. And that brings us to an uncomfortable intersection. Misty Crosland has never been charged in connection with Haleigh Cummings' disappearance. In the eyes of the law, she is not guilty of any crime related to that child. Her 25-year prison sentence stems solely from her role in selling approximately $3,000 worth of prescription pills during a police sting operation. Yet the presence of Haleigh Cummings looms over every aspect of this case. From Judge Wendy Berger's decision to bypass the youthful offender option, to the imposition of the maximum sentence, to the way the public continues to interpret Misty's punishment, the unresolved disappearance remains an unspoken backdrop. Supporters of Misty Crosland argue that she was targeted, manipulated, and punished far beyond what her offense warranted. They emphasize her age, barely 18 at sentencing, her history of trauma, her lack of education, and her vulnerability. They believe law enforcement used the drug case as leverage after failing to secure charges in the missing child investigation. Critics see it differently. They argue that Misty's shifting accounts and unresolved contradictions demonstrate a pattern of dishonesty. That even if guilt cannot be legally proven, she likely knows more than she has ever said. And that in a case where justice could not be achieved directly, this sentence may be the only accountability that was possible. Stepping back, Misty Crosland's story reveals something larger than one woman or one crime. It exposes how trauma compounds over time. How poverty and lack of education create susceptibility. How systems built to enforce justice can become instruments of excess when traditional prosecution fails. It also forces scrutiny of conditions inside facilities like Lowell Correctional Institution, conditions that many experts argue function as punishment beyond the scope of any sentence handed down in a courtroom. Whether Misty Crosland played a role in Haleigh Cummings' disappearance, or whether she is a deeply flawed individual caught in circumstances she could not control, her daily reality inside Lowell represents a level of suffering that extends far beyond the intent of the law. So why do some describe Misty Crosland's prison life as worse than death? Because death is final. It is an ending. What Misty faces is not an ending. It is repetition. Wake up. Work. Eat food that barely sustains. Navigate an environment where mistreatment is normalized and reporting problems can lead to punishment. Lie down in a cell with no privacy, no control, no lasting sense of peace. Day after day. Years pass without meaningful rehabilitation. Without education. without a clear path forward. The same concrete walls, the same metal fixtures, the same narrow routines that gradually erode autonomy. Voices echo through vents and hallways, a constant reminder that nothing here is truly private or quiet. Each passing year moves her further from the person she once was, and closer to someone she may no longer recognize. And through it all, the unanswered question remains. The disappearance of Haleigh Cummings. A shadow that has never lifted. The unanswered questions remain. The accusations. The belief, held by investigators and much of the public, that Misty Croslin knows something, that she has withheld the truth, and that her punishment is therefore justified. This is the reality she lives with. A sentence shaped not only by time, but by suspicion, by silence, by an experience that is unchanging and deeply psychological. There is no escape, only time. Misty Croslin is currently scheduled for release on June 10, 2031. By then, she will have spent 21 years in prison for selling approximately $3,000 worth of prescription pills. Haleigh Cummings would be 21 years old today. She remains missing. Her case is still unsolved. A reward of $15,000 continues to be offered for information leading to answers. So we leave the final question with you. Does Misty Crosland's sentence represent justice, or something far more troubling? Does her daily existence inside Lowell Correctional Institution amount to a punishment that extends beyond the intent of the law? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video thought-provoking, please consider liking the video and subscribing to True Crime Mysteries 4K for more in-depth examinations of true crime cases that challenge how we think about justice and accountability. In the next video in this series, we'll take a closer look at what happened to Ronald Cummings after his release, and the events that led to his subsequent rearrest. Until next time, this is True Crime Mysteries 4K, reminding you that behind every headline is a human story, often far more complex than it first appears.